Good morning, everyone. This is exciting. You would think a room like this might be where you start the plenary and put everyone in, but I think it's a little too small. It makes our speakers this morning feel like rock stars, and they are rock stars. They are going to take you on a whirlwind tour of storage tanks, both past, present, and future. So keep that in mind. We are going to have a question session at the end. Most of them are leading you into a more involved session later on this couple of days. So lock in their faces and their names and track them down in between with those really big, really deep questions that I know all of you are going to generate. So I've gotten a preview of these presentations. They're great. I come out of it with a whole bunch of questions myself. So if you all don't come up with questions, then I'll just sit here and ask some questions. No problem. But you are allowed to steal that thunder from me. My name's Josh Blanco. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm just here as the minor MC to introduce our speakers this morning. Thank you all for coming in. I'm going to start by introducing Daniel Lee. He's from OUST with EPA. He's been with the Release Prevention Division for about 3 years. He's done a bunch of cool stuff before that has made him a very knowledgeable individual, and he's going to give you an intro on some of the EPA's tools and their vision for the future. Super brief. Come back later for the extra details in other sessions he'll tell you about. Come on up, Daniel.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to be here. This is actually my first National Tanks Conference. And being here actually reminds me of the SWAMO annual meeting last year. I remember specifically the opening session with Suzanne Ingalls, and it was entitled, "Why Can't We Be Friends?" And it was focused on a relationship between states and the federal government. But I remember myself and other states folks in the room kind of looking at each other because it was such a foreign concept within the tanks program because we work so well. So this really is a testament to the program, and just to kind of reiterate some of the things that Will spoke about earlier, of course the agency now has 5 pillars. So the reason why we're here is to ensure that all Americans have access to clean air, water, and land. But how we do that is brought out in the 3rd pillar, which is cooperative federalism. And so even before that was a pillar, this program has truly been a testament to that. And even this session is a testament to working together, because you're going to hear a brief introduction from myself, which gives a very cursory overview of a federal regulatory perspective, but then you get to hear from industry as well as 2 states. So again, definitely happy to be here, and I'm a little under the weather, so if I sound a little funny, I apologize about that. But I promise that's the end of my soapbox for now. So now I'll dive into the presentation, which is the reason why we're here. So there's several converging trends facing our program that are of interest, but also present some challenges in the future. And so, of course, even though that we know gasoline vehicles will be the dominant vehicles on the road for years to come, because it takes the U.S. fleet about 16 years to turn over, which also means UST programs are going to be essential for decades to come. However, we all know that cleanups continue to become increasingly more expensive, and they're honestly outpacing inflation. And so even if states receive steady funding from EPA, which I would say at this juncture is a best case scenario, I know Dominic said she hates this statement, but it is a situation where many states will have to do less with more, unfortunately. And that's exacerbated by the fact that many states use taxes on fuels in order to provide supplementary funding for their programs. But however, as we continue to look toward the future of the program, it's expected that fuel, at least the volume of fuel sold, will decrease. And the primary reason this has to do with the ever-increasing fuel economy of vehicles, which doesn't even take into account EV adoption rates, which of course vary significantly by state. One thing that makes that even more difficult is the fact that there's so much aging infrastructure in the US in terms of UST systems. So nearly, and of course this was mentioned before, but nearly 75% of the 500,000 UST systems within the US will be 30 years or older within the next decade. So that's really a startling statistic, and what that means for owners and operators is likely they're going to have higher maintenance fees in maintaining these aging UST systems. It also means there may be challenges in them offering alternative fuels due to compatibility issues with their systems. But it may also mean challenges for them in obtaining and maintaining financial responsibility. So what does that mean for states? Is that they may need to prepare for many sites closing. And what does that mean, of course? Well, oftentimes releases are identified upon closure, especially when tanks come out of the ground. And we're talking about a potential of factors that it will cause more closures to occur, which more cleanups, but there's less money going into the programs. So this is kind of what we're here to talk about and work through. So now that I've talked about all the doom and gloom that's facing us programs nationally, let's take a step back of kind of where this conversation started. So it started with the SWAMO's paper. Their paper focused on state fund soundness. And if you haven't had a time to explore that document, it's a wonderful resource. But one of the things that came out of that effort was a request to the EPA to assist in this effort. And so our first initial response was another paper. And what that paper is about is providing states one with options, and it's split up into two parts. It was focused specifically on non-US experts, and the reason why is that we hope this paper can act as a resource for your legislatures, as well as other constituents within your states who you want to get more acclimated with the program. So again, the paper is in two parts, and the first part just kind of acknowledges these convergent trends that we're discussing here today, but then the second part summarizes a menu of options. And for example, one menu option that's on our menu, which is probably the most popular with you all, is raising the taxes, because we all know how easy that is to do with their states. But of course, that's a joke. EPA certainly isn't here to advocate for the raising of taxes, so don't say you heard that from me. However, that is one of the many options. One of the others to be looked at specifically for states is also, is there ways to protect financial responsibility within their state, especially if commercial insurers vacate the market upon some of these rapid closures that may occur in the future. And then also specifically for state funds, states, is there ways to potentially increase their or modify their caps to where they have more funding for the future to address these cleanups that may be coming? Or is there ways to reduce the cost of cleanups by maybe using risk-based closures, which was mentioned earlier? Such standards like MYSTIC could potentially be assistance in doing this. And so the second resource that we provided which is the companion piece for the paper that I just mentioned, is the US Futures Forecasting Tool. And this tool really is to enable states to use your data, because it's very complicated to look at all these converging trends at a national level. So it's really important for states to work together with us. And so we have a tool, and it's a series of Excel spreadsheets that can be downloaded, and you can input your state data and really get to test drive some of the options that are presented in the paper, but also look at how some of these converging trends are slated to affect your states in coming decades. So I don't want to steal too much of Tom Schubin's thunder, because he has a session on the UST Futures Forecasting Tool. So if you're able to make it to his session, definitely he would love to hear from you. And if you can't make it, he would still love to hear from you, because the more data that we get into this forecasting model, the more accurate it will become. And so we definitely hope to improve this model over time, because it helps states understand, one, the potential soundness and sustainability of their states and how these converging factors will impact their states and what they can potentially do about it, and test drive some of these options. But then we also have resources specifically for owners and operators. And so we have a new web area on the EPA website that's in two parts as well. And the first part just reiterates some of these challenges that are facing the program, but it's focused specifically on owners and operators. And then it also dives into the regulatory requirements, specifically from a federal perspective for owners and operators. Because again, there's no age limit for US systems from a federal perspective. So as long as the US systems continue to pass their inspections, they can continue to remain in operation. And that's it from a federal perspective. And it also discusses challenges like I just discussed, FR, but it's again focused on owners and operators and what types of options are out there for them, as well as what do they plan to do with their systems. Some may look to close them, upgrade them. What are those options and what are resources for them? And then there's also, this was written before ASTM started to work on a formal standard on evaluating aging tanks. But that's also a great resource that's in the works, and it's really providing a resource for owners and operators to better evaluate their systems. And Tim Smith within our office is working with Pat Rounds, who's the chair of the committee on this ASTM standard. But again, both of them would love to hear from you if you have ideas and get more feedback on this effort as well, because it certainly would be an additional resource for owners and operators, specifically those who are owners and operators of aging tank systems. In the second part of this resource that is targeted specifically for owners and operators helps them think about the future of their systems and provides them with funding resources. So there's some federal resources for upgrading and modifying systems. Some specifically have to do with offering higher fuel blends and things of that nature. But there's also a lot of states who offers incentives as well for their states that can be of benefit. And so we've done a significant amount of research and kind of putting these together in one location on our website with links as well. And this presentation will also be provided, so you'll have access to the links and the resources that I'm sharing right now. And then lastly, it also gives information on how some owners and operators may want to add EV charging stations or offer alternative fuels, and again, what resources can help them, especially since there are certain expectations about them losing funding over time and them not generating as much funding from the selling of fuels since it's projected to decrease. So again, we know that there's a lot of converging trends that are impacting our program. However, and we know that there's no single solution that will work for every state, but that's why we're going to have hear later from multiple states so you can get a multiplicity of perspectives. But definitely check out these resources, check out the tool, test drive some of these factors specifically for your state, and definitely reach out to us because we definitely want to continue to work with you, continue to have a partnership with EPA to address these issues for decades to come. So thank you all, and I look forward to getting to talk to you all one-on-one throughout the day-to-day. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So next, we have an outstanding speaker, Jeff Hove. He's from the Transportation Energy Institute. So all that stuff from Franklin and Will about partnership, we have it right here. Everybody's being represented on the stage today. Jeff, we've just done the roller coaster, all those clicks as you go up the hill. Daniel, build us up. Jeff's going to take us down the hill. He's going to talk about all the things that worry him. You're going to ask him questions at the end. He's going to take down your name and dig in deeper on what your issues are in the state, I bet, because that happened the whole time we prepped for this session. But I think you're really going to enjoy it. Hey, Jeff, I'm going to suggest you use this microphone because we're not really getting good pickup unless you lean right over there.
Okay. We good? All right. Who let Vicky in the house, by the way? That's embarrassing as hell. Okay. Real quick. We were asked to run a project that kind of builds off of my SWAMO's 2015 work. I'm going to talk a little bit about aging tanks. I really love this panel, by the way. Daniel, you did a fantastic job, and there's so much good information out there. While I was working on this project, I dove into a lot of EPA's documents and just some fantastic work. And so if you haven't already reviewed those, please do. Because if I can understand them, then you hit the nail on the head with getting a policymaker to understand some of these things. So really good information out there. And then following me is really what I really like about this panel is that we got representation from a state fund perspective, and then from a state that's using private insurance perspective for FR. And so I think seeing those two kind of side by side really paints a good picture. And of course, you guys all know that it's vastly different from state to state. which I really became aware of when I jumped into this project, right? Doing a lot of surveys, reaching out to a lot of you. If you haven't heard from me and you've got, I'm not really looking for questions from you all, I'm looking for answers. So I'll prepare you for that right now. You can come up to me with a question, I'll be like, I don't know. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Right, so a lot of what we do at the Transportation Energy Institute is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find answers. And our organization is an industry board. We work with a lot of the national labs. We work really closely with EPA and a number of other agencies on multiple issues involving transportation energy. So one day we could be talking about electrification. The next day, you know, when is hydrogen going to be here, if ever? What about e-fuels? How are e-fuels compatible with existing equipment? And you know, what's the potential for e-fuels or synthetic fuels, which are ultimately very, you know, low carbon fuels? And that's been kind of a, for about the last 4 or 5 years, we've really focused on emissions. And so I got brought into this discussion because industry was throwing concerns at us about the cost of financial responsibility. And they said, let's let Jeff do that. And I'm like, oh, no. So I think a few people knew real quick about my background. My education is hydrogeology and a focus with contaminant transport. And then from there, I went on to do some contract work as a consultant for like the DoD and military folks and Army Corps at military bases, and you know, looking at unexploded ordnance sites. So I'm surprised I have any of my hair left, but and other chemicals and all sorts of nasty stuff. From there, I wore out my welcome, and I moved down to Iowa because Iowa accepts anybody, and they're all inclusive in that sense. Okay, I won't go any further there, but so did a little more work with the UST fund as a consultant, and then I started working for the Iowa Underground Storage Tank Fund itself for about 5 years. And during that process, during that period, I worked on claims, assessments, corrective actions, et cetera. And then I took a position with the Iowa Petroleum Marketers Group at the time for several years. And during that process, what was unique about that time period is that's when the Iowa UST fund privatized. So I was there working with the state agencies, the Department of Natural Resources and all those folks. You know, when we walked through the privatization, going from, you know, a state UST fund to private FR mechanism through insurance. And then as that progressed, then now I'm where I'm at today after a couple other bouts with some other trade groups and what have you. And what I like about TEI is that I no longer have to advocate. So I do not advocate, we do not take a position. Our research is all peer reviewed by our board of advisors and our board of directors, and it goes through a peer review process. So the idea is to be as unbiased as physically possible. Anyway, long story to all of that. I thought some of my background might be important as to why they asked me to jump onto this project. And so the concerns that were brought up to us were kind of threefold. One is, the number one concern is increasing costs to maintain financial responsibility through private insurance. Deductibles are going up, premiums are going up. It's getting really confusing as to, you know, for the tank owner, you know, how they can maintain their facility, you know, at these costs, or are they going to have to shut down? You know, there's very, very few large chain stores that want to come into, like, for example, rural America and take over a convenience store, because as you guys know, it's all volume based. If you can't do the volume, you know, chances are you're not going to get a big player to come in and take over. So this turns into a discussion on rural retail distribution networks and what's going to happen, you know, over this period of time. And of course, the premise of this, a lot of this is aging infrastructure. There's other things going on, but for the most part, when we talk to people, we talk about, okay, your tanks are aging out. They got to come out of the ground. It's going to cost you $700,000 or whatever that number is. The second concern, sorry, I put in the word unsubstantiated, and you'll hear, I'll talk more about this in a minute, but mandatory age thresholds on UST systems. Where is that coming from? Who's making those decisions? Why are we making those decisions? And then the third one is, which is pretty close to home for me, because I'm in Iowa still, they haven't kicked me out yet, is E15. Different fuels. And again, at TEI, we work with all different kinds of fuels. We've got a whole mid-level ethanol blend working group right now, looking at up to E30, what have you. But the E15 situation in Iowa is really unique right now. So I'm going to follow Iowa really, really closely because they put in an E15 mandate. And of course, that means there's a lot of tanks coming out of the ground. So if we can look into the future a little bit, what does this mean, right? We're all concerned. We start pulling tanks out of the ground, what's that going to do to our UST funds? Is it going to overwhelm them? Are we going to find new releases? Yada, yada, yada. If our UST fund can't keep up with all this stuff, is EPA going to come in? And as nice as they are, and I do think they're really good to work with, they have the authority to say you're not complying with Part 280. Your FR mechanism no longer works. You're going to have to switch over to a private insurance type thing. You have to come up with something else, and they do have that authority to do that. So it's just something to keep in the back of everyone's mind. I know I'm preaching to the choir on a lot of this stuff, but so that being said, where is industry at today? And again, by industry, I'm talking about fuel retailers that own underground storage tanks. That's kind of my bread and butter. There's a lot of those folks that sit on my board, mostly the larger chains. So we don't have a lot of the mom and pops that are engaged with us, although I'm very, very familiar with them. I've worked with them in the past. I understand, what happens when a super Walmart goes in 30 miles away with fueling, and everybody is okay with driving 30 miles to go fill up on fuel that's a lot cheaper, leaving that rural convenience store kind of stranded there and volumes kind of disappearing. So anyway, some of the background right now, we got 118,000 plus fuel retail locations. 55% of those are single store operators. That's a big number, and you'll see that'll be like 55 to 60%. So, and I know it's really easy to say we want to work with the big guys. The big convenience store operators, they have a regulatory compliance person on staff, right? The single store operators, you have to talk to the owner, and that owner is very, very busy. So it's easier to say we want to only deal with the big C stores, and if these small guys go away, that's no problem. It makes our job easier. And then at the same time, the large chain stores are probably likely to have the same attitude. We don't care about the small guy. I mean, if they go away, we're going to get more business, through attrition. And so I'm just trying to paint a picture for everybody here. At the same time, this is about 55 to 60% of our fuel retailers in the United States. So it's not something that is going to go away. Or if it does, it's going to end very badly for a lot of people. Communities as a whole. I'm sure a number of you have been, in your office, and then there's the one C store operator in a small town, and they're looking at shutting down because they had a release, they're going to file bankruptcy, on and on and on, and that's the only thing in the town. And literally, that's the only business in the town. So it's a very serious situation. Hopefully we tread really carefully as we're working on this. The other thing I thought that was interesting is that out of all of the UST sites, it appears based on UST Finder, good resource once you figure out how to use the damn thing. I had to call Tom and say, hey man, how do you run this thing? I'm like, what the? And there's a new one coming out, right? Is that what Tom's talking about? The second one? So I had all sorts of suggestions on what they should put into the new one, by the way. And he's just like, no, you're too late for that, buddy. We already had, that train has left the station. We don't want to hear from you. No, I'm kidding. He didn't say that. But about 70,000 of these sites are non-public. So they're non-public facing retail, so they're either government or they're private fleet. So there's a whole nother universe out there of UST sites that need to be considered as well. And I just thought that was an interesting side note when you look at the breakdown. So what we were asked to do, what are we doing? We're going out and we're surveying everybody. If your office hasn't heard from me, please get in touch with me. I've been emailing, calling, with all sorts of crazy survey questions that you look at and say, that doesn't apply to me, you know, or maybe it does, and a lot of you have been extremely helpful, so I appreciate that. But with these surveys, and what this project is meant to do is to go to industry and say, okay, if you're concerned about, you know, maintaining your FR, here are all your options, right? Which is documented. EPA has this in all their reports and stuff. But again, our group we try to do the same thing. Let's put it into a language that industry can understand, and that it's usable for them. And so, let's face it, when it comes to self-insurance, that's really not even an option for most of these guys. They don't have millions of dollars a bank that's going to bond or what have you. So you got private insurance or you got the state fund. Is the majority of where these more sensitive locations are at. So try to give some background, some education on that. Assess the current state of the aging USTs. Look at the outlook, like Daniel was talking about. You know, we're going out to like 2035 is kind of our goal here. And then number 4 is probably the most difficult, is causation. Looking at what is causing the releases out there. Is it the tank? Is it the line? Is it under the dispenser? You know, a lot of the language we see out there is that complete system overhauls are going to be based upon the age of the tank. Well, I think most of us understand that most of the releases aren't coming from the tank. 80% or so are coming from the lines in the dispenser. So why are we pulling up all these tanks? Anyway, just things to consider. But that causation has been really difficult to determine. And that shows up in gaps in data. And then we're going to put together a report. Again, it goes through our peer review process. We work with EPA and all of the survey questions that go in there. And we're just going to throw our findings out there. Again, not advocating, but trying to paint a picture as to what the landscape is looking like out there for fuel retailers. Again, you guys have all seen these maps before. The red is state funds, the rest is either fully private insurance or there is some tail coverage going on, you know, with state funds. So, but they kind of, again, the vast majority are looking at, you know, with the active fund is managing these claims, and so what EPA started doing, I think last year they talked at a conference, and they were really focusing on insurance states. But first, some of the preliminary, and I forgot to mention, this report's nowhere near done, by the way. I'm looking at December probably. I'm going to shoot for December to get like a final copy. Might be Q1, but that's when these findings and stuff should come out. Big takeaways right now: nobody is tracking causation. Nobody is looking at, yes, there was a release. They say, well, there was a prior lust site there before, therefore there's no way to tell. That's not really true. If there's a new release and it was either catastrophic or minor, you typically go out there and you can see exactly where that release is coming from, whether it's under the dispenser, the line, or even the tank. But there's no record of that. And so that causes a big problem when we start legislating, you know, mandatory tank removals. I like data. I like seeing data. I like seeing, why things are failing, and then, okay, let's legislate the hell out of that, and let's fix the problem, provided everything else lines up, right? Like, is there enough money to do that? Private insurers that I spoke with, they all said the same thing, that the tank age plays a big role in where they set their deductibles and their premiums. However, none of that data is available. So they say that they're collecting it, but the data is not available. So that causes a problem as well. So right now, the preliminary finding is it's not unlike, if you go back to the SWAMA 2015 report, there's a really good, in the appendix, a report by an actuary that basically said the same thing. We need more data on causation on this topic. And that was 2015. So I thought, well, maybe somebody actually read that, and we were starting to do it 10 years ago, but no. And not that I found it, again. So again, I'm up here, I got a lot of questions for you guys. So if you do have data on that, please reach out to me. I'm dying to see something, along those lines. So that's kind of where the report's at right now from the first finding, is that we got this huge gap in data, that we need to consider. And I'm not talking about compatibility or anything like that. This is just strictly an age discussion right now, because that's all I was asked to look at. So the data that EPA has been using when it comes to aging, you guys have probably seen this before, where it looks at pre-91 installs and installs from 91 to 96, right, due to upgrade periods and what have you. So, and starting to get a look at what is the age of our infrastructure out there. So this was the first thing I wanted to do, was update this information. That's why I've been calling all of you, and you guys have been sending me spreadsheets, and we're crunching numbers on active and temporarily closed sites, tanks, excuse me. So trying to get an update on these numbers. And so from the responses so far, they're significantly different for the most part. When we look at, so the red line up here was the 2018-2019 data for pre-91 installs. The yellow bar is what the information I've been getting from you all here more recently over the past several months. So some big differences. By the way, if Washington's in the state, you responded, looks good to me. So that's why you got nothing changing there. I had to take a shot at Washington for that. Okay. We need to talk more about that. But the change is significant. Florida is Florida, right? They've been going balls to the walls. 5 minutes left? I'm done? I'm already over. What happened to the 5-minute warning? All right. Okay. You don't need to go. I'm on the last slide anyway. Okay. So, so I plugged a bunch of very specific assumptions into AI, right, just to take a look at what are we looking at for 2035. And again, this is based on EPA's 2018 data. And so the aging tanks are a problem. The aging tank systems are a problem. There's no doubt about that. We're looking at about 65% to 70% will be over 30 years by 2035. So we know that the infrastructure is aging. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And how is it going to be different in different regions? Again, thank you to all those people that have been participating in the surveys. My last survey I sent out to about 150 tank owners, and I'm getting responses back from them right now as well. So I really want to make sure industry has got some input into this as well. And I apologize. There. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
I'm sorry, man. I wasn't paying attention.
Next up, we have Mahesh Albuquerque from Colorado. He's been around for a while. He's responsible for the oversight of their UST, AST, LUST, and FUN programs. On top of that, several other public safety programs. So Jeff just gave you the doom and gloom, everything that could go wrong in the next 30 years. And Mahesh is going to talk about all the things that Colorado tackled in the past 30 years and all the things that could have gone wrong that we as tanks programs have handled. And he'll be followed by someone else to talk about the future a little bit more. And we really want to hear from him, so I'm just going to let him go.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here and have an opportunity to actually share some of what we've done in Colorado over the last 30 years, actually. A lot of what we've done, things that that have been instigated by questions that we've asked ourselves, kind of like the questions that Jeff's brought up, that Dan talked about previously on kind of what's the future of our tanks program going to be. And so with that in mind, what I thought I would do is really start with where we are today. And I wanted to kind of just put some perspective to our program because we're a little different from some of the other programs in other states. So we say we are all under one canopy. So we have the inspection, the cleanup, the storage tank fund, as well as weights and measures in one program. So we are all across the hall from each other, one agency that really helps us collaborate and reach across program stuff out here. Again, just some snapshots of kind of some stats to put things in perspective. We're kind of a mid-size number of tanks. When you look at the variation across the country, we have about 12,000 some storage tanks that we regulate. Some pretty good compliance rates. We spend about $32 million in cleanup costs every year in reimbursements. We have a fund that pulls in around $40 million a year through fuel surcharge. At the gas pump, you get 98% of people get what you're paying for. So like if you go and put 5 gallons in, you're getting 5 gallons. We check that too. And then one of the things that I will be talking about here and later this afternoon is our incentive program. We've spent about $5.4 million in incentives for prevention. Our release stats, just some trends here. Everything seems to be heading in the right direction. We think we have a pretty decent program. We have slightly under 600 some open releases. That's the blue line on top. And then the green and the red lines are closures and new releases, and they kind of are keeping track with each other. So we're kind of closing as many sites as we are opening and then dealing with the backlog. When we started our program, the backlog was 12,000. So we are now 600. And so I was actually going to start at the beginning. So I'm going to, in this presentation, do like a 30-year snapshot of our program and kind of share with you all some of the things that we kind of went through. All of you all share the first two, the creation of the tanks program in '88 and the regulations and all that. In Colorado, we had our first underground tank regulations in '89, and at that time, our program was not under one roof. It was in 2 separate agencies. So we had the UST program within our offices, and then the cleanup and the fund in a different department, the Department of Health. They did a really, poor job of managing their program and the cleanup of sites and payment and all of that. And this was in the early years of the tank program, but it got to such a point 5 years down the road where industry was really fed up with the inefficiencies there, and so they approached the legislature, and the legislature actually moved the fund and the cleanup program to our agency. And so that happened in 1995. And what I'm going to do now is do 30 years from 95, and I'll take it in like 10-year bite-sized chunks. So what we got in 95 was a mess. We had angry owner-operators frustrated with, hey, we've submitted stuff, cleanup reports and plans and all that. They just seem to be going into a black hole. Nobody's responding or anything. They weren't getting reimbursement. And when we dug into it, obviously there was a lot of inconsistencies among reviewers, lack of report formats. I'm sure you all have seen things similarly in your programs. And so we had obviously a challenge to deal with, and definitely needed a lot of change. And usually this is what you get. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we're going to make all these changes, but when you actually get down to doing the change, you don't get that many volunteers to do it. But we were able to actually get quite a few things done that first decade. So within the first 10 years after 95, we really put a lot of time and effort into training our staff. So we had staff that came over from the other agency. They were not at all happy to be with us because they were kind of forced to be there. So there was real challenges with levels of expertise and need for training and just being on the same page. We did a lot. We adopted, it was at that time, the ASTM's risk-based decision-making, a document that came out in the early 90s. And so we adopted that into our cleanup criteria. We created a bunch of owner-operator guidance documents just for consistency. We created standardized report formats. We came up with like reasonable cost guidelines for what would be considered approvable, for different levels of work that's done. Another big thing that we did was we created a new database. So being that we were merging three different programs into one, we created a database that could actually talk to each other. It was called the Colorado Storage Tank Information System, COSTIS. And then, created the reasonable cost guidelines. And some of the outcomes of those first 10 years was we really were able to kind of chew into that backlog and kind of get rid of a lot of the backlog, get caught up, really getting sites cleaned up in a timely manner. But I think the big things that we really did, and I'll spend more time on that through the rest of this presentation, is really getting our staff to be bought into what they were doing. Really what it also did was, through the work that our staff did, we were able to actually build trust back with owner-operators and most importantly, with our Petroleum Marketer Association. And I can't stress how important it is to have that good relationship. And I'm going to show you some examples on how that spanned out in the next 2 decades following this one out here. So our second decade, if I go to the next, move forward 10 more years ahead in Colorado's program, we were in a pretty good spot, I think. One of the things that we really focused on was earlier we were doing, I'm not sure if this is a pointer, but we were working in this area. So we were doing what I would call transactional work, just the job, functional knowledge, the what's and the how's, on how do you do this, or what do you do that? And we wanted to kind of shift our mindset to the why. Why are we doing that? And so that's really what we focused on in like our second decade, and I'll kind of share some examples here on that. And so really it was a lot of like culture change within our organization. So our status quo was, you saw some of the stats I'd shown earlier. We were doing pretty good. We had, we were getting sites cleaned up in time. We had a solvent fund. People were happy. We could just sit around and just keep doing what we were doing. But one of the things, this thing really drove me, and it's like, yeah, we could continue doing the same thing, or we could really, question ourselves and do something different, and radical within the program. So one of the things we asked ourselves was, are we using our monies wisely? Are we using our funds wisely? Is it helping? Is it doing what it's supposed to? Who's benefiting? Cleanup costs going down? Just a ton of questions, and some of the questions that were brought up by the previous 2 speakers here. We'd spent a lot of money in cleanups, and one of the big questions for us, and uncertainty, was what if our fund were to sunset? What would happen then? Would owners be in a good enough position to get private insurance or not based on their compliance history and all that? And what could we do? And so, the obvious answer, ounce of preventions were the pound. We would talk about that, and so we were like, let's kind of put the money where our talk is. Let's walk the talk. And so we came up with a few things that we thought we could look at doing, and that was provide incentives for release prevention, and then funding for petroleum brownfields to deal with sites that were not eligible to our storage tank fund, address the aging tank infrastructure, and one of the other key things that was driving us was rather than, because we went through the aging tanks and couldn't come up with, by this date, these tanks need to be removed, because we saw things all across the board, and as Jeff said, most of the time it's not even the tank, it's the lines, it's other connectors from where the release is occurring. So to mandate a tank age could be a little challenging, and so we were like, how can we get owners to voluntarily upgrade without us drawing a line in the sand on that? And so one of the things we realized was we don't have that authority ourselves. We need to go to the legislature. So we really worked with our petroleum marketers. It was right around the time where we were going to get some statutory changes to incorporate the Energy Policy Act of 2005 UST requirements. And so we went in 2007. And into that bill that gave us the authority to incorporate that, we added incentives for upgrades. And that bill was successful. Around that time, if some of y'all remember, some states were going after some of the big oil companies on double dip, where they collected monies from the insurance companies and also from the state. And so we were very successful in recovering money, and we recovered several tens of millions in our state. So we had almost like a surplus of money. It was at the same time that we were going through or coming out of the Great Recession. The legislature was looking everywhere for money that they could get their hands on. And so one of our goals was to try to keep the money within our program that we had just recovered and use it for our own, for things that help our program. And so I'm going to bring this up as something a little out of the box. So this thing has nothing to do with the tanks program directly. So in Colorado, we have this Johnson-Eisenhower tunnel that goes across I-70 as you're heading out west into the mountains. It's a pretty important corridor for transportation to the west coast. And it's about a mile-long tunnel. And because of its importance, and you can't have any damage in that tunnel, hazardous traffic has to be diverted across Loveland Pass, which is a side road that goes over a pass and gets pretty treacherous in the wintertime. And oftentimes you hear of like tanker rollovers on that cause quite a bit of an environmental issue. And so our petroleum marketers were wanting to see if we could get traffic through the tunnel. Our governor's office wanted to fund a fire sprinkler system in the tunnel, and we wanted to save the money that we got in our fund. And so we worked collaboratively with all three entities and said, let's come up with a bill to actually help fund, put $5 million as seed money for a fire sprinkler system, and let's create a petroleum cleanup and redevelopment fund. And so we were able to, with industry's assistance, run this bill in 2013 that if you actually look at the fine print out here, it just says the bill is concerning the petroleum cleanup and redevelopment fund. But if you looked at the media and everything you saw in the news, it was all about the tunnel. And sometimes that's what happens when you're running a piece of legislation. What it's intended to do and what you want is not what's in the media. This is really what we were after, and this is what we got. And we got the ability to create this redevelopment fund and really protect some of our recovery money to use on like brownfield sort of cleanups. Then again, and I talk a lot about legislation because a lot of the things that we wanted to do were not authorized in our existing statutes, so we had to go to the legislature and kind of get their buy-in to what we wanted to do. And so in 2015, we went in with another bill to adopt EPA's 2015 regulations, and when we did that, we decided to add some additional things into that bill to allow us to pay for tank removals. And so that was a new incentive that we came up with. And that's an incentive that some of y'all may have already heard about. So in Colorado, we allow, or we will reimburse tank removal costs up to $1 per gallon, or it used to be up to $1 per gallon, up to $30,000 per facility. And then we also would waive the cleanup deductible on certain sites to incentivize owners to actually remove tanks. I'll be talking a lot more about this and more details about this in the afternoon, so if you want to come to that session later, you'll hear more on the details on this. But here's something, so that was the second decade. Now kind of moving into the third decade, one of the things we really focused on is public value. And so these are, I kind of got these three spheres out here, but these are things that we always ask ourselves when we are looking at a change project and embarking on something and trying to do something a little creative is, do we have the capacity to do it? Is it legitimate to do it? Or do we need to get that? And oftentimes that's going to the legislature because you're not authorized to do it otherwise. And then, is it actually adding value to the public and the regulated community? So some of the things that we've done more recently, and I'll just kind of touch on these, are risk-based inspections. So we used to go out and try to do every facility every year or every 2 years, but we realized like we would be more effective when we do our inspections to do our inspections as educational opportunities and then really focus on risk. And so we have factors based on the tank system, but also on the operator's previous compliance history. So the more compliant and the better system they have, the less frequently we'll go out and inspect them, and we focus more of our attention on those that are struggling with compliance or have systems that we would consider higher risk, single wall tanks, older sort of tanks. And then our inspectors get to really rate the risk because they are the ones that are actually dealing with these sites all the time. Another thing that we've gone over the years is to a mobile inspection app. So we are really they aren't doing paper forms and all of that. It's all electronic, and it goes their inspection certificates go directly to the owner operators after they do their inspection. We used to like drop them off at the gas stations previously, and they would go in the trash. There would be nothing, no follow through on that. So this has really helped. We also created a recognized environmental professional designation, really to raise the bar on consultants within our state, set certain expectations for them, and really be able to have dialogue with them when we do outreach so that we could get a unified voice or, from that group when we were looking at changes to regulations, changes to cost guidelines and things like that. And it's really been pretty effective in Colorado. Our incentive program was so effective that we actually doubled the amount of money that you can get for tank removal. So we now allow $2 per gallon for tanks that were installed prior to 2008. And the reason we picked 2008 is 2008 and after, everything had to be secondarily contained and double-walled and all of that. So prior to that, there could have been some single-wall tanks, and typically the older, higher-risk tanks for us. We still have the $1 a gallon for the newer tanks, and then we continue to waive the deductible on certain upgrades and UST removals. And then we are not done with legislation. We keep going back every few years. A few years ago, we went back again and we said, what can we further improve? And we went in with this bill that allows us, so we have a $10,000 deductible in Colorado, so our storage tank fund reimburses up to $2 million with a $10,000 deductible and then percent reductions for non-compliance issues. And what we were finding nowadays with the newer tank systems is that, yeah, we're detecting releases quicker. Because we're detecting them quicker, they're getting cleaned up quicker, and they're cheaper to clean up. And with all those three coming into play, we realized that there were fewer people actually applying for reimbursement to our fund, and many of those actually, the reason was that they had cleanup costs that were less than $10,000 in many cases, or sometimes just a hair above, and it was not worth their time to put in an application. And what we recognized was what we're actually doing is we are disincentivizing those owners that are diligent and are monitoring their systems, finding the releases quickly, and getting them cleaned up. So we thought, what can we do to help them out? And so instead of a $10,000 flat deductible, we now have the authority to do a percent reduction. And so we have a 10% deductible in lieu of that flat thing. And so now an owner can actually, if they have a smaller release, let's say it was a $9,000 release, earlier they would have got nothing. Now they can get 9,000 less the 10%, the $90, so 8,100. So it's a small thing, but it actually goes a long ways in getting stuff. So I'm just going to leave you all with a few takeaways. The incentive programs really helped in Colorado. We've taken out almost, I would say, we're approaching 1,000 tanks. We're in the high 700s right now through this program. But really being able to engage and empower your staff to be creative, think outside the box is really helpful. Building a culture that fosters continuous improvement, the stakeholder engagement and collaboration, especially with your marketers associations, you'd be surprised how much that could help you at the legislature, because I can go out there, go through our governor's office to try to run a bill. It won't go anywhere if it's not industry supported. And so it just helps a lot, and you can be on the same page with the same end goal in mind. And the other thing I would say is that sign says it takes a while. Yeah, and there's always opportunity to improve. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Be glad to answer questions later. And like I said, I have another session this afternoon that'll dive deeper into the actual incentives if y'all want more information. But that's all I got to share. Thank you.
Next, we're going to welcome Mark Latham from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. He's worked there for over 23 years, but for the last 5 years, he's been supervising the licensing and enforcement unit of Connecticut's Emergency Response and Spill Prevention Division.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you all. How many of you are states by show of hands? Excellent. The bulk majority of you. So you've heard Colorado, you've heard about the incentives and the creative things that they're doing in Colorado related to, you can probably hear me just fine, related to their state fund. Connecticut, in contrast, no longer has a state fund. The state fund was swept in 2012, and we have built and rebuilt a strong preventative program. So you're going to hear Connecticut talking about a strong private insurance state, if you will, for financial responsibility without a state fund. So today's focus will be on the unique challenges facing Connecticut, specifically regarding our underground storage tank requirements. I'll talk about the innovative underground storage tank regulations that were recently adopted in 2025. Yay, it was well over a decade in the making, so we're pretty proud of that. We believe we're future-proofing our program. We believe that, Clarity leads to transparency, which leads to certainty, and that's important, not only for the owners and operators that have to comply with these requirements, but also for the insurers and the manufacturers, insurers that provide reduced premiums because of the clarity, the manufacturers that need to provide new tanks in Connecticut when old tanks are removed, the consultants, the testers, the remediation contractors, all of the folks involved in this industry. I'll talk a little bit about the performance-based incentives that Connecticut has for quick cleanups, a little different than Colorado, and quick compliance. And then lastly, if we have time, I don't know how much time I have, but I know it's short, we'll talk about some of the innovations in our field inspections and field enforcement as well. Okay. Did we lose it? Okay. So in terms of unique challenges for Connecticut, for keeping Connecticut safe, first of all, Connecticut is what, the second smallest state in the country. We have a dense population, 3.6 million people, relatively small square miles. You could probably fit, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 Connecticut's in Washington state. That said, the vast majority, thank you, the vast majority of folks are on a public water supply, whether that's through a reservoir or an aquifer protection zone with a public or private drinking water well. Thank you. Excellent. In addition, Connecticut enjoys a very high water table. So the mean average, I think, water table, depth to water table is like 5 to 8 feet, depending on where you are in Connecticut. And of course, if you're not familiar with Connecticut, the southern border is basically Long Island Sound, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean. The key ingredient, the key problem here is the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, swept the vast majority, all of the funds by now, that was associated with Connecticut's state fund. So Connecticut enjoyed the financial responsibility mechanism for a state fund, and it was a state fund until the legislature swept those funds in 2012. Therefore, we had to retool. We focus on prevention, and that's what this presentation will focus on, as well as a strong enforcement associated with the prevention program. So, of course, preventing releases to the environment is paramount. Okay, in terms of the universe of facilities that have USTs, it's just over 1,800 in Connecticut, small Connecticut, and of those, there's just under 5,000 underground storage tanks located in those 1,800 facilities. Obviously, there's a lower trend, a downward trend, due to many of the reasons we've talked about, folks have talked about already. Compartmentalization, electronicizing electric vehicles, et cetera. Nonetheless, we have a pretty large universe, and they're primarily made up of the commercial gas stations are basically owned and operated by the marketers, the major marketers, the 7-Elevens, the Cumberland Farms, Sam's Foods, the big box stores. We don't have Buc-ee's just yet in New England, but Connecticut is the gateway to New England, and we're ready for them when they're there. I just can't wait to see the signs on the highway first. So the cornerstone of this presentation is the fact that, and I'm proud to announce that that May 7th, 2025, Connecticut adopted our new underground storage tank regulations. The package actually included 3 different items. Our state-only heating oil tanks used for on-site consumption. I won't be talking about that, but that universe is equal to the size of the federally regulated universe, which I'm talking about today. And then the commissioner, in her powers, has the ability to assess administrative civil penalties. And so we've added, as an innovation in Connecticut, to try and deter noncompliance for relatively minor violations, administrative civil penalties for underground storage tank violations. And all of this is posted on our website, and these are live links, and I'm sure you'll have access to these, the presentation materials. Taking a deeper dive into sort of the technical changes that we've made to our underground storage tank program, first, we've vastly streamlined and we clarified our cleanup process for underground storage tank systems. Basically, what Connecticut has done is taken the provisions of our pollution abatement orders and inserted them into the regulations. And so it has vastly improved our cleanup process and requirements. We've deleted certain outdated standards, including requirements, including references to codes of practice. So that includes NFPA 30. We've clarified certain things. We've clarified compatibility. We've clarified definitions. Shout out to my EPA counterparts who helped us review these regulations and help clarify certain definitions. We've clarified who must conduct monthly inspections. In Connecticut, that's the B operator. We've clarified the roles of the A, B, C operators, as well as approving A and B operator training providers that provide training to the AB operators in Connecticut. Some of you are here at this conference. We've clarified what a repair means, and maybe what it doesn't mean, what is prohibited. So if you're repairing a 2-foot section of your double wall piping, fine. If it's greater than 3 feet, you've got to replace the entire spans of piping. I'll talk about release detection requirements for double wall tanks in a minute. We've added, and Connecticut is one of few states that has a life expectancy requirement. It's life expectancy on both the tank and on the piping, not just the tank system. So we've added greater flexibility for lower cost options to comply with life expectancy requirements. In the past, the regulations had a life expectancy based on the manufacturer's warranty. We've heard about some of that. We've added a couple of categories, 30-year, 40-year, and 45 years to that, depending on the type of UST system. We've added more stringent secondary containment requirements for hazardous substance tanks. We've added a third-party annual inspection requirement. And we've added fees to our cleanup standards to compel quick compliance. So there's a fee schedule that was approved in our regulation, approved by the legislature in Connecticut, for if you clean up within a certain period, within a year, there's no fee. However, there's a rate schedule. If you clean up between a year and 2 years, it's $1,000. There's a fee associated with that. And it incrementally goes up $1,000 to a maximum of $5,000 over the 6th year. And then it's $5,000 thereafter. So a little different incentive than what Colorado was talking about. However, it is an incentive to clean up quickly. And then lastly, we've added more stringent and additional options to our suite of financial responsibility mechanisms. And I'll talk about these in a minute. With regard to our performance standards for installations, we have changed the definition. We've expanded the definition of an underground storage tank system to not only include the tank and the piping, but also the dispensers. So breakaway devices, shear valves, and the dispensing hoses are now part of the definition and regulated. Also, UDCs and STPs must be liquid tight and contain a sensor. If they do not, there's a phase-in period in our regulations to ensure that the double wall piping has continuous interstitial monitoring. And then spill buckets have to be a minimum of 5 gallons. However, there's a calculation involved there in case there's a long span of transfer hose. With regard to periodic testing, we have annual testing, 3-year testing, and even 6-month testing in certain situations. The key to this slide is a table that's posted on our website, which delineates the type of test based on the type of tank system and piping systems that are in place. And this table also identifies the life expectancy for each of these types of systems in Connecticut. Again, clarity, transparency, education, you've heard it all, and then enforcement for noncompliance. We've created new forms associated with this regulation. Again, this regulation is greater than a decade in the making, many lessons learned. One of the things that we've had to do is create new forms as well as update existing forms, all of which are listed here. The cool thing about these new forms is they follow PEI's RP 900-21, the 2021 version of the RP. With regard to upgrades to release detection and overfill prevention, this is a key piece. Double wall tanks and double wall piping installed prior to October 1, 2003 will have a 2-year period to utilize continuous interstitial monitoring. The October 1, 2003 date is very important in Connecticut. It's a statutory mandate that basically stated any new installation beyond that date needed to be double-walled FRP with tanks and piping with continuous interstitial monitoring. So we're now capturing those prior to. Additionally, for all new tank installations, as of August 5th, 2025, there was a 90-day phase-in period here. All new tank installations must be double-walled, all right, and have continuous interstitial monitoring that monitors both the primary and secondary walls, utilizing either inert gas, liquid, or under constant vacuum. Basically, we're talking about, in today's world, brine systems. And the piping must also utilize continuous interstitial monitoring, and I talked about how they have to be leak tight and they have to be censored. Additionally, Connecticut has imposed a requirement for drop tubes. Drop tubes, the bottom of the drop tube must be within 6 inches from the bottom of the tank, primarily for air emission purposes. But Connecticut is now consistent with our air regulations by requiring in a year, again, another phased, agreed upon phased period here to ensure that all drop tubes that are installed must be within 6 inches from the bottom of the tank, consistent with our other air requirements. For overfill protection, we still maintain the 90% high-level overfill alarm. However, in Connecticut, it must be both audible and visual, based on some of the lessons that we've learned. Okay, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit. I like to talk money, and I know we've been sprinkling money in throughout this morning's session. Connecticut is no longer a state fund program. Therefore, all owners and operators must secure FR to protect against the inability to clean up releases in Connecticut. We've added to our suite of instruments 3 self-insurance mechanisms, primarily for the local governments. Not only are we listening to the Energy Marketers Association, we also have to listen to our local governments. So we've added 3 instruments. We've also made the instruments more stringent. In the case of insurance, we've removed the inconsistencies that we typically see in insurance policies with the regulations. The regulations preside in Connecticut based on a simple fix that we took from the RCRA Subtitle C RCRA financial assurance requirements. We also removed the junk bond status for those seeking to utilize the bond rating test. We've also finally broken through with that tangible net worth that came from a 1985 regulation. The tangible net worth, if you are going to self-insure Connecticut, your business must have at least a minimum of 20 million instead of 10 million, adjusting for inflation there. And then lastly, we've added the risk-based indicators to the Dun & Bradstreet ratings, which Dun & Bradstreet has done for years anyway. We've just incorporated those risk-based indicators into our rules. And then finally, for insurers that provide a notice to cancel policies to the insured, they must also submit that notice to the agency in Connecticut. This is to help prevent lapses in coverage where we would ordinarily not be aware of them. Life expectancy. Life expectancy is another major tenet of Connecticut's preventative program. Okay, and I mentioned it's not only the tanks, it's also on the piping. We basically have three categories. I'll coin it. The first category, STIP 3 tanks, has a 30-year life expectancy. Excuse me, I could barely see what I'm reading here. The second category can be either 30 years or 40 years, depending on the type of UST system installed, whether it's single wall or double wall, and whether or not it is using interstitial monitoring that doesn't monitor the primary and secondary walls. What I'm referring to is basically a double wall tank that has a dry space and a sensor. These are, so 30 years, okay, or 30 years, or 40 years if you are not located in an aquifer protection area or have a private well within 1,000 feet of the underground storage tank, and you comply with additional testing requirements. Those 30-year tanks may have a 40-year life expectancy. With regard to Category 3, I've split it up into two. Basically, I'm going to call Category 3A the Cadillacs, and I'm going to call 3B the Maseratis. The Cadillacs are your double-wall FRP tanks and piping that utilizes interstitial monitoring and does not monitor the primary containment and the secondary containment walls, such as a sensor in a dry space. Those are automatically given 40 years for a life expectancy. And then the Maserati is basically the newest, latest, and greatest tanks with all the bells and whistles. Those are your double wall FRP tanks with piping that has the continuous interstitial monitoring that monitors both the primary walls and the secondary walls using a technology such as inert gas, liquid, or under constant vacuum. Get the theme? These are brine systems, and they carry a larger 15 years of life expectancy, 45 years in Connecticut. I'm not going to talk too much about the closure requirements, except that Connecticut now prescribes the education and training necessary for persons involved in the permanent closure activities. We prescribe in regulation the sampling that's needed, where the sampling must take place, in the areas where contamination is most likely to be present, under the dispensers, under the piping, as well as the tank grave itself. We prescribe the number of samples and how things need to be assessed, as well as providing a closure report to us within 90 days. Previously in Connecticut, this was all based on guidance, and so we've codified that in regulation as a lesson learned as well. If we do have a LUST, a leaking underground storage tank, there is an immediate report requirement to the agency. Folks must report the release within an hour in Connecticut. That includes suspected releases, releases into the UDC, for example. We have specific regulations associated with that are incorporated into our underground storage tank regs. I've provided a link to those, as well as a really nice flow chart, which basically says for underground storage tanks, anything except for drips at the dispenser hose is reportable. Anyone involved in cleaning up releases must be licensed as a licensed cleanup contractor in Connecticut. And then Connecticut has created an innovative suite of electronic forms for addressing cleanup. Site characterization, remedial action plans, all of those forms are online, and we anticipate utilizing this electronic system with the regulated community back and forth using a Salesforce solution. Lastly, the notification and all of the record-keeping requirements, which were sprinkled throughout the regulations, are now consolidated into one section. The notification is an electronic notification, and the record-keeping requirements, basically, for each component, you must maintain and have available for our inspectors 1 year beyond the life of the component. Oops. Okay. In terms of the incentives, I'll call them incentives, these are regulated, performance-based incentives that hopefully will deter long drawn-out cleanups and non-compliance in the field for minor violations. I mentioned to you the 5,000 threshold on a graduated basis built into our cleanup requirements. And the civil penalty schedule, there's 20, in fact, minor violations that we've added to our administrative civil penalties. They range from $100 to $1,000. The bulk of them are about $250. I keep hitting enter. In terms of our innovative approaches, okay, thank you. Our innovative approaches are no different than Colorado and many of you states in here. We have electronic tablets. The tablets utilize a software provided by Dan Blake. It's called the Inspector Tool, Mobile Right. If you're in here, Dan, thank you very much. You do a fantastic job for Connecticut. We receive electronic signatures. We issue electronic reports. We issue electronic notices of violation in the field, as well as notices of disabled UST systems, AKA red tags. Did it again. And then lastly, we have a really robust enforcement program in Connecticut predicated on this prevention, these new regulations that detail the prevention. There's a couple of things, I'm not going to go into detail here, except that if you install a substandard tank after that phase-in period, August 5th, we will red tag you. If you do not have a Class A, B, C operator at your site and it's operating, we will red tag you and shut you down. We also work well with our EPA partners. We're obligated to inspect every site once every 3 years. We're on a 2-year schedule right now, and we have a robust complaint intake system that we utilize. It's web-based. We can receive anonymous calls, and we do take those seriously. We will inspect those sites as well under our enforcement response policy. And with that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation and grab something for you to take home. I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead and stay up here. Gentlemen, can you come up on stage? We've got 5-6 minutes for a couple questions if anyone has it before I have to let you go. I imagine there'd be more time, but imagine how hard it is to pack 30 existing years and 30 future years into 90 minutes. So we've got Mark Latham, Daniel Lee, Mahesh Albuquerque, Jeff Hove hiding in the back. If you see them around the conference and you have a question, grab them and ask them. Anyone want to step up right now and ask a question? No, there's never that. Look, there you go, Craig, back there. Oh, anyone. I don't want to steal the question here from someone else in the room. If there's someone there that gets it. Uh, Perhaps Mark or Mahesh, maybe in some of what you've dealt with in the past, you could answer a question like this. I think the incentives that Colorado has are really interesting as far as getting that turnover to new systems. Has there been any work, especially because you have all your programs together, on collecting the data to show the value in that replacement as opposed to the cost of cleanups if sites live to the point of having a release happen? I mean, if it's no, it's okay, but.
We haven't specifically collected data on what it would cost to have a release with where we will reimburse up to $2 million, or to incentivize an owner to take their tank out. And actually, in our view, taking a tank out of the ground is a good thing because you're either getting rid of an old tank, or if you're putting a new tank in, it's meeting new tank standards, so it's more protective. And we feel like we are ahead either way. But we haven't done a cost analysis on that.
But as far as the cost to the state program, then it could be up to $2 million, right? If it's a cleanup, how much is it? The maximum that you might pay out for the replacement?
60,000. 60 plus another 10 if they get the other 10,000.
At least from the state perspective.
From the state perspective, yeah, they'll get 70,000 to upgrade, and we've got about, like I said, close to 1,000 takers on that. So we, in my afternoon presentation, I go in a little deeper where we have actually been able to reduce the tank age, the average tank age, by 25%.
So do you know the title of that session? Or which track it's in?
It's on the release prevention track,
Release
I believe.
prevention
Yeah,
track. And
yeah.
it's the 130 or the?
Oh no, it's a financial responsibility track. It's on, it's on prevention incentives.
And then I know there was a lot of talk about aging tanks. That's the next cross-program session this afternoon, if you're interested in, that Jeff referenced. And then, do you know, Daniel, happen to know where the session is that talks about? I'm sorry, I should have looked it up beforehand. I didn't, but it is 12 o'clock right now. Lunch is on your own if you didn't hear that before, but find someone new, have lunch with them. Thank you, everyone.